What a nice crowd. We even have a video photographer. Yeah, slightly. You ready for me? Who does not understand English? Raise your hand. Everyone understands English here? Awesome, I have no problem. My Hebrew is not good enough. I want to ask you if any one of you here, first of all, my name is Marlit Wandel, and I'm the grandmother here. This is my son, Jeff Wandel, and Ori's my grandson. These are my grandchildren. And it's a privilege to be here. I want to know how many of you have Holocaust surviving families. Can you raise your hand? 4? 4? Did you ever, you 4 who have, did you ever hear them talk about the Holocaust?
Only very slightly.
Did you ever hear them talk about the Holocaust? The ones who were over there. What I'm suggesting, are they still alive? No, it's too late to get them to talk. All right, I actually wouldn't mind if you had questions that I could possibly answer, unless you want me to start talking about myself, but I would like to know what particularly interests you of the area of the Holocaust. Anybody has any ideas? No? You want me to say, come in, come in.
There's a lot more room.
I can move over a little bit so you have more seating space.
Yeah.
I'm glad you could come, all of you. I do talk to Taglit, you know. You heard of Taglit at Yad Vashem when I'm here.
And birthright.
I meant birthright. That's called Taglit, no?
Same thing.
Birthright is Taglit. Any one of you have been to Taglit, with Taglit? Yeah. You have been to Yad Vashem? You have heard Holocaust survivors' testimony? They have less and less of that now because there's not enough left over. They don't have enough time for Taglit. So I could tell you my story, but I would like to hear if you have any particular questions. Anybody?
Well, probably they all have questions during their study.
Okay. Now, if anybody tells you that it did not exist and it wasn't bad, it's not true. It existed, the Holocaust existed, the worst time in history. We just passed Passover, and those who read the Haggadah would have some knowledge about the slavery in Egypt. Well, this was a different kind of slavery, but it certainly was slavery. Now, historically, you can go back to the 1930s, when Hitler made the Nuremberg laws, 1935, which meant that Jewish patients could not be admitted to a hospital, and non-Jewish doctors could not treat Jewish patients, and Jewish doctors could not treat Aryans. So it was a discrimination from very heavy from that time on, including schools. The Jewish children were not welcome in schools, and the Jewish population was forced to create their own schools, and they started from young children. It was much harder to do it in high school. So for instance, my brothers went to German high schools, and they had a very rough time. They were beaten up, their bicycles were taken away from them, and I'm going back to 1935 on, 1935 to 38. So, and the teachers would not stand up for the students. They would look away, they would make themselves unknowing, and persecution could go on in a totally civilized society, and the Germans were civilized. And basically Hitler promised them everything that the Jews had, and what he was able to do was take the Jews out of their apartments, out of their businesses overnight, take away all their possessions, not tell them where they're going, and ship them out. Even before the concentration camps, they shipped them out to neighboring countries. They did not want to have Jews in their country. Any questions so far? So now, I was born end of 1930, and I was the fourth child of 5 middle-class family, and I was not aware of anything except when I was 5 years old. I contracted diphtheria from my brother, my older brother. I was the fourth child of, I had a brother 3 years younger than I, who was killed in a concentration camp with a children's transport. When I was 5 years old, my older brother had diphtheria, and he should have been in a hospital, but he couldn't be admitted because he was Jewish, so we treated him at home. When he was a little better, my parents opened their bedroom where he was recuperating and let us see him after a long. So I ran in and I gave him a hug, and I contracted diphtheria even worse than he had. And I was on a dangerous, this was the time before penicillin, so I had to be hospitalized. To make a long story short, and the Jews were not admitted to the hospital. We had a Jewish pediatrician who used his influence to get me into the hospital. And so I was admitted to the hospital. I was isolated totally, not because of diphtheria, because I was Jewish. And my father had to pay for the ambulance that they transported before, because they said Jews contaminated the ambulance even. And all the toys that my family brought me, I never got to see, and my family couldn't visit me. And I was very unhappy, and I didn't know why. I was 5 years old, and I was treated like a pariah, and I had no idea what it means to be Jewish, to be discriminated against, any of that. Leah was my niece is here. Oh, no, but how are you, sweetheart? They came from Meitar.
There's a water behind you, sorry. Let me take the opportunity.
Anyhow, I was cured. My life was saved, and I got back to the family. Now this is 1935 we're talking about. Can you visualize 1935? The war didn't start with America in the 40s, till the 40s. By 1938, on an October night, I was asleep. The older brothers were doing homework. We were home with a babysitter, and my parents were out to a meeting, I believe, or to a concert, I'm not sure. Gestapo men came into our apartment, and they demanded to see my father, and the babysitter said he wasn't home, so they sat down to wait. And they waited for quite a number of hours. And when my parents were coming home and they saw light in the living room late at night, they thought, there were rumors that they're coming to pick up the men for labor camps. So my father thought they were after him, and he took off. He went into hiding. My mother went upstairs alone. So they took the whole family. They said, wake your children, dress them, just take any documents you may have, and you'll be back soon. It's going to be a matter of a few hours. Well, my mother woke us, and we got dressed. Just the clothes we had on our back. We left the apartment, never to come into it again. We were never allowed to come into it again. They took us to the police headquarters. This is October 1938. And next morning they were shipping us to Poland, from Germany to Poland. I was born in Germany.
Did they tell you at some point what's going on, or did they actually tell you, like, you're never going back to your apartment, or just
no.
They said
They
you
don't
you
tell
figure
you
it out?
anything.
You figure it out. as
No,
you
we
go.
didn't
It's only
figure it
a few
out.
hours. You'll be back.
No, we didn't figure it out either. We had no idea that we're not coming back. So they took us to the borders of Poland. Poland did not want to admit us. We were not just our family. There were probably 50 people from the city, at least. Mostly families, mostly children, a lot of children, because the men got sort of warning, and they ran away thinking, at first the Germans took the men only, But when they saw they couldn't find the men home, they took the whole family. We had no idea. We had no idea at all. And we never were able to get back to the apartment. We were never able to see my father again. 1938, my mother had 5 little children with her, the youngest being 5 years old. And we were shipped over the border to Poland, a new country that didn't want us either, new language, no money, everything. We wound up eventually in the city of Radom, and there the Jewish community took us up, wanted to take care of us. And we were about 30 children, so they wanted to put us into orphanage, a Jewish orphanage that was in Radom, Poland. But my mother was with us, and she said, these are not orphans, I don't want an orphanage. Find foster homes for these children of similar ages that they could go to school with. So this is what they did. We had a problem. We were very religious and we were kosher. So there were not that many kosher homes available that had space for another child. Because as a rule, in Poland, the religious families were rather not that wealthy. They had more children and they were not so wealthy. And so it was a problem. But so we 5 children got distributed in 1938 among 5 different families. My mother went to a family an older couple that did not want children, so she couldn't have any children with her. And we were at the mercy of very well-meaning people. So this is 1938.
By the way, Stettin was the first place evacuated of all of
Stettin was
Germany.
the first one. It was in October. This was before Kristallnacht, which happened a little later. So now we go to school. I was very unhappy. I didn't understand any Polish. I was in a strange environment of well-meaning people, but I was not with my siblings. I was not with my parents. And I was a problem. I carried on. I wasn't even 8 yet, and they finally put me in the same home where my sister was happily ensconced with a girl her age. I had a sister 2 years older, and 2 is fine, but 3 is a crowd. So I was again misplaced there. I was not happy for a long time. It took me at least half a year to get acclimatized to the language of Polish, to the reality. Anyhow, I'll fast forward just to tell you that from 1938 till 1946, after I survived the war, I did not have a home with my family. It was always, if it wasn't a family, it was a camp, concentration camp, labor, and I survived by the grace of God after they took us from the ghetto to concentration camp in Radom with the Polish Jews.
Maybe you should say something about, I don't know, that people, in terms of the transition, maybe.
Did you ever hear of a ghetto? You know what? Who does not know what a ghetto is? Who knows what a ghetto is?
And maybe explain.
It's a section of the city where Jews were concentrated on. It was very hard to find lodging there. So from the ghetto, we had to work in the ghetto for the Germans, and then we were sent to concentration camps, separated men and women. In the concentration camps, there were constant selections of the old and the young, because only if you were able to work hard, could you maintain yourself. So we all had to pretend that we were the right age and the right strength for working, and I could never be a child. I was not mature looking. I was 10 years old by this time, and I was between my mother and my sister. So the miracle of my survival, and I have been to 9 major concentration camps, shipped from one to the other to the other. The main thing was, first of all, I believe in God, so God meant for me to survive. I was between my mother and my sister, protected constantly, without anybody ever knowing that we were related, because this was another demoralization of the Germans, that they separated families, they separated friends, They did not want you to be happy or content in any way whatsoever. They did everything to make you uncomfortable, both work-wise and spiritually and food-wise. And so between my mother and my sister, they sometimes had to hold us up. And the hardest thing about the concentration camp was almost harder than the work itself, which was grueling, because we were in salt mines, coal mines, and all over. The standing on an Appellplatz. Did you ever hear of standing in an Appellplatz? Standing like soldiers in the morning and in the evening to be counted. We had to stand up in a row straight in the morning before going to work and in the evening coming back in. And until the Germans were satisfied with the count, you couldn't move. You couldn't go to sleep, you couldn't go to work, you had to stand up, and that is very gruesome in all kinds of weather. The labor that we had to do was incredibly, and I'm telling you that whatever you ever read or hear about the Holocaust, it is not even a fraction of the horrible reality. And every survivor has a different story. Every story is true and every story is different. And every survivor survived, but here for the grace of God go I. It was just a miracle. Because Hitler meant to exterminate each and every Jew on the earth that he could reach. That was his claim to fame. We also were in a gas chamber, which was in Auschwitz, Birkenau. We were told to undress and go into what we thought it was a room twice the size, with shower spigots on here. And we were standing up like sardines next to each other, naked, all women. And the gas, we thought we would be showered with water, but it was a crematorium and there was supposed to be a cyclone gas coming out of those spigots. So at that particular time, the reason I'm here to tell you the story, the cyclone gas misfunctioned, either because of some sabotage or because of lack of the cyclone gas, and we walked out of the crematorium alive.
In the history of Auschwitz,
And
that only happened two
times.
Twice.
That the crematorium malfunctioned and that the people walked out alive. They just killed them with gas and then they burned them in the oven. Those who have been to Europe may have seen the ovens there. We also have numbers on our arms. I have a number, concentration camp numbers, and the miracle being that my mother, my sister and I have consecutive numbers from Auschwitz, which identifies the exact time and place we were in. And I believe we are probably the only related survivors that have consecutive numbers on their arm. Another thing, we would never be allowed, I was not allowed to call my mother mother throughout the years in the Holocaust, because the first thing they did is, as I said, they separated families, they separated friends for demoralizing the prisoners. So I called my mother by her first name, Peppy, and we had to be very careful, even in regards to the prisoners next to us, our so-called friends. It was a major issue. I will take any questions you want. I just want to tell you that after the camp, I don't want to go into all details unless you question it. We were eventually able to rehabilitate, and my oldest brother, who got to America on his 60th birthday on a student visa, became a soldier in the United States Army in the Second World War, and he was able to bring us over to America. And after being in Switzerland for 1 year of rehabilitation, we were able to come in April 1946 to America, and that's where I had my first family together. Whatever was left from our immediate family, because our extended family was decimated a lot. From my immediate family, I lost my father. He was shot in 1942. We never did see him. He was shot as the 10th man, as a reprisal for some event that happened with the Germans in concentration camp. And my younger brother, 3 years younger than I, was taken with the children transport to be exterminated. So remember, the old who couldn't walk or couldn't work hard, and the young were killed right away. And it went on every day. Like I said, the Appellplatz was like a barrel of apples. Where the farmer will assort, or the shopkeeper will assort his apples and get rid of the rotten ones. This was their method. Every day they assorted the people, and the sick were not taken care of, they were killed off. The young ones who couldn't work were killed off, and the old ones. And the disabled ones were of all nationalities not taken care of at all, but got rid of. He wanted the master race. He thought that every body should be perfect. Now, when I came to Israel, talking of perfection, my mother lived in Zikaron. My mother, by the way, lived through the war till 100 years old. We had a good life in America, and we have rehabilitated in every way. But when my mother used to see these little Israeli children playing in the playground at Zikaron from a window, she would say, Hitler wouldn't believe that these blonde, blue-eyed children are Jewish children. You know, he always said blonde, blue-eyed are the German race, the German race. So it's incredible. I think life is a miracle, and we should all do our best every day to be better human beings. I'll be glad to answer any questions you have. I'm making it short.
Did you get you to call your mom again?
Yes, I did.
After the...
40, yeah. She lived to have a lot of nachas. Nachas means joy. You know what nachas may mean? She lived to have a lot of nachas, and she was quite a lady who had a cup half full, not half empty, and she gave us the spirit. She also gave me a deep religious feeling of believing that God meant for us to live, and God meant for us to have a good life, but for the grace of God go I. Do you have a question?
How did the Germans react when the gas chamber didn't work?
I'm sure they were disappointed, but they figured you'll get you next time. They were disappointed only in the time wasted, you know. But every day they were gassing us in the gas chambers. There was no problem. They gassed over 6 million people constantly in every camp, so there was no stopping. This was just one incident. I'm sure they were annoyed, but they knew they would go on with with extermination. At the end of the war, when the Allies came and the Russians came into Europe, and the Germans ran out of ammunition, pretty much so, because they were at the end of the war, and they didn't want to leave witnesses, and they didn't have cyclone gas anymore. And the witnesses that were left in the concentration camp were half cadavers, cadavers means
Half dead.
Half dead. So they devised a very clever plan. It was called the Death March. Anybody ever heard of the Death March? They marched out of concentration camps, these half-dead people, that without food, without clothing, without shoes, and they expected us in a very fast march with dogs on the side and whips, and they expected us to drop dead on the wayside, which we did. Most of us dropped dead on the wayside. And some of those that even survived it, many of them died right after the war of overeating. The stomachs were totally shrunk, and when they were getting chocolate and chewing gum from the well-meaning soldiers and food, their stomachs couldn't take it, and they died of a burst stomach. A lot of them died of disease and of overeating after the war. And then to rehabilitate these people that were left was a different chapter again. That was a different chapter. If you have any questions, ask me. But believe, because how many of you have read books about the Holocaust? How many of you have never heard about the Holocaust? Don't be afraid to tell me. Because there are many people I have my husband needed help, and I had help from India, and I had help from all over the country, and they never even heard about the Holocaust. Holocaust was a very European thing. Okay, kids, youngsters, young people, I would love to answer questions if I could, yes.
Can you speak about your life in America after? Or, how they initially greeted you? Did Americans even know what was going on? Were people just ignoring it?
I don't hear so well, but you think, you asked
In other words,
me
when you
how I
came
liked
to high
America?
school, no, when you came to high school, how were you accepted? And I think that's a very good question.
That's a very good question.
Because people saw the numbers on their arms
Yeah.
and said, what is that? And I know my mother said she answered, I have a bad memory, it's my phone number. And because she couldn't believe that people had no idea.
Actually, I again had trouble coming to America with the language. So as from Germany to Poland, I had half a year at least of not being able to communicate or to understand what was going on. When I came to America, I had a different problem, but it was a language problem. I went straight into high school with my sister, and we were very well received there, although there was a tremendous gap in education. I did not, by the way, a professor at the University of Rochester asked my sister, tell us about the educational
System in Auschwitz.
system in Auschwitz. And this is a professor at the University of Rochester, graduate school. She was talking about the Holocaust. So there was a big gap of education. I mean, we're talking from 38 to 45, I had no education, no formal education. I came to America straight to the high school because I was of high school age. I didn't speak the language, but I was received very lovingly by everybody. We were novelty. We came in April 46. Nobody ever heard of Holocaust survivors. And nobody even saw anybody from Europe because we came on a preferred quota from my brother, the soldier, who had a mother who was preferred quota. So we were very lucky. We went to Abraham Lincoln High School in Brooklyn, which was not far from where we lived. And we had a female principal and very lovely teachers, and everybody was very cooperative, and they gave us their all attention, and we did very well. So once I was in America with our apartment, with our remnant of the family, I made a very good adjustment. And eventually I learned English. As a matter of fact, right now I'm first have the time to write my memoirs, and I started to write. I have it written out already, only a matter of 3 months barely, but I have to regurgitate it over and over again, and it probably won't get published if at all by another year maybe. But I'm attempting it. My sister, Judy, who is the mother of this niece of mine, had her whole life wanted to write about experience. She was 2 years older. She was far superior to, very mature, very intelligent. She graduated high school with a scholarship in a year and a half, and she was absolutely brilliant. She went to school. She moved to Rochester when she got married. She went to school there, starting college, and she went to graduate school for creative writing in order to write this famous book that she's been writing her whole life about her experiences. The fact was she never had the time to publish, or the money, which takes a lot of money, to finish it. She wrote manuscripts, she wrote endlessly. And right now, her daughter-in-law, she's passed away, her daughter-in-law is busy writing the book. And if it gets out, it will be a bestseller because her memory is fantastic. And she hopefully left proper notes. And I hope the book will be published, and it will be the best book written for the Holocaust survivor. I have so much faith in her. Any other questions?
I have a follow-up
Yes.
question.
Go
Sorry,
ahead, you.
go ahead.
She did.
When you went back to Europe, like where did you go first and how did you feel? Like have you ever been back to Europe after?
I can't hear you.
Were you ever back in Germany in your
New
home?
York.
Yes. Germany, yes.
But not to Stettin?
No, never went back. That became Polish. That became invaded, I think, by Russians and Polish. I never went back there. I never had a desire to go back. But the Germans tried to get us back to offer us trips to Germany. and they will show us how nice Germany is, and they wanted us to come back to live. And it was about 20 years ago that my husband and I went back to Germany on one of those trips, and they gave us a very lovely trip in a nice hotel in Berlin, and they wanted to convince us to move back to Germany to come. What I saw there in the street was a mixture of totally different what Hitler would have envisioned. There were all kinds of nationalities, all kinds of mixed marriages, and all kinds of able and disabled people, and he would have turned in his grave if he knew. But I did experience another time. I was in Israel for a year, and on my way back, I went through Germany, and we lived for a few months in Frankfurt am Main, which is Germany. I had at that time, Jeffrey was about 5 years old, or 4 years old. I had a baby of a few months. I had an American baby carriage in Frankfurt, which was like a canvas plate box on wheels. I don't know if they still make them today. So I felt extreme discrimination in Frankfurt am Main. What year was it? You were 4 years old. 58, 59. Twofold. As an American, the carriage marked me, the baby carriage marked me as an American. They hated Americans, even though they took all their cities were built by Americans' money. And I'm talking about 59 now. And I felt their hatred. And I also understood German. And I could hear them talking. So they discriminated against me as an American and as a Jew in 58, 59. I would never be able to live there. I didn't choose to go back on birthright or whatever, or these trips that...
March of the Living.
No. Oh.
Night of the Living. I enabled my grandchildren to go back because they felt they wanted to, and it would add to their educational knowledge. They went back, I think, for in high school age, I believe, for 10 days or whatever. And I never wanted to. I can't stand the language speaking in the street, German language, even though I could speak it, but it bothered me when people spoke. And I would never want to live in Europe. I think not just Germany, most of Europe is infected with anti-Semitism, and they do not like the Jews. In America, I didn't experience it so much because I lived in Jewish neighborhoods in New York. Maybe it's different out of town, I don't know. Where I lived, I did not feel anti-Semitism in America. Any other questions? Yes. Speak up loud so I can hear you. My
Can you
hearing is
just talk more about like Liberation Day, what you were feeling or what it was like when you were liberated?
Can you hear that?
What you call so-called liberation.
Oh, you so
Yeah, there was no, my liberation, there was no Prince Charming that came to give me a kiss and wake me up. It is a fairy tale. What happened, we three were on the death march from Auschwitz-Birkenau, which means we were driven like cattle, fast, with guns and dogs, with the Nazis on the side, until we dropped that, and most of us dropped that on the... So we made up, we always made up together, we will drop that. And when we saw, by the way, the roads where we were driven on means driven like cattle, not in cars, on foot. There were primitive roads, not paved or anything, country roads, and there were 2 ditches on each side to let the water evaporate, on these country roads. So we fell down together, we rolled into the ditch, and as it happened, we fell on top of an American scout. This is 1945, who was there to scout out where the Russians were coming from, because the Americans came from one side, the Russians from another side in Europe. And he could have killed us. So many occasions to get lost or killed. We scared him to death. We couldn't communicate because he didn't speak German. We didn't speak English. And he radioed his superiors who came and who realized who we were. And they took us to the nearest farm village, and they told the Germans to house and feed us and take care of us for the time being, because they couldn't do anything. They were on the march. The Germans did, even if they were reluctant. They took care of us. They gave us a room and they gave us food. And here's my mother, the heroine again. She locked us up from the rich food. She didn't let us eat. She saved our life again. She very carefully fed us porridge for many days until our stomachs got used to some food, and because we would have died there from the food. And eventually, when we saw there was nothing doing in the village, we made our way to the closest city, which was Leipzig. How do you say Leipzig in
Leipzig.
Leipzig in Germany? And there we found American soldiers who let us know that in the concentration camp Buchenwald, whoever heard of Buchenwald? Okay, Buchenwald was a men's camp, an old standing men's concentration camp. That in Buchenwald, the survivors were gathering and they were getting help to communicate with their family and to reestablish themselves. So we made our way to Buchenwald, we three, and my brother was somewhere else, the one that survived. There was one brother that survived, and we got together with him later. And we made our way to Buchenwald, and there we got very good help and very good advice. And they steered us towards Switzerland. That's another story. And we got out of Germany as soon as we could, we spent a year in Switzerland while waiting for American visas to come through. And the friends there were 300 children who survived, that was given asylum in Switzerland, sort of. That's another story. Most of our friends went to Israel, at that time Palestine, because they had no family at all left. They were alone. They went where their friends would go. We were lucky that we had papers to go to America eventually, so we waited there till the papers came through. But my friends that went to Palestine from Switzerland were not allowed to come into Palestine because the British and the Arabs didn't let them. This is after the war, 1945, 46. And so they put them into Cyprus. They caught them, the boat. They went to Cyprus. From Cyprus, they eventually got into Palestine illegally with small boats, whatever. And many of them went into the army to fight for the War of Independence, 48. And many of them died without ever leaving a record. After going through the concentration camp, they fell in the War of Independence without leaving a trace of who they were, who they belonged to, because they had nobody left. So a lot of our friends just perished that way. So after the war, after Prince Charming's kiss, there's another history. Okay, who had other questions? Yes.
I wanted to know how long it took you to start telling your story, if immediately or...
Oh, that's a very good question. I did not. Like my niece said, in high school when they asked me what the number on my arm was, I said it's my telephone number, and it was perfectly acceptable to everyone. They accepted that it looks like a telephone number. And I saw that I felt nobody really wanted to hear. And I didn't want to talk, but not because I didn't want to talk only. I felt nobody wanted to hear, including me. And my sister talked about it all the time, since I remember talked about it. I never talked about it. But you wouldn't believe what happened. Anybody saw Spielberg's movie, Schindler's List? Who saw it? Well, I thought it was one of the best movies I ever saw. Before that, I saw a lot of Holocaust movies, and they were mostly documentaries and boring and trains, and it was not a story. I felt Schindler's List was excellent. I was not involved at all with that story, but it got me to think that I ought to talk. And I started to talk, and I never thought of writing. I got to talk, and when I came to Israel, I spoke at Yad Vashem a lot. I took courses how to speak to groups of people. And my favorite groups to speak to is Taglit, Birthright. Because those are youngsters who, it's the future. And I'm very glad to talk to you. And anybody else, I did not talk, and I don't regret it. Go ahead. Who had?
Yeah.
Yes.
So you were 8 years old when you went into the first ghetto or camp? And what did you understand about what was happening, or what did your mom tell you?
What did you understand when you were 8 years old and they took you out of your house?
I didn't. I tell you the
Nothing.
truth.
They didn't know what was going on.
I had fun in prison. I was 7, not even 8, and we were jumping on the beds with cousins and friends. We met a lot of children there. So to me it was a fun night. I had no idea. My poor parents.
I think there's a misunderstanding here.
You're asking me what?
Wait, let me just bring a little up to date then. When my mother was taken originally at the end of October 38, all right, things were done in stages. So the first thing that they did is they kicked her out of the house and sent her to the border and sent her over. The camps came later. In other words, you're talking about 3 stages between, like during the academic year of 39, she was in a Polish school. But then they started a stage before the ghettos, where they started contracting their places. Then there was like a year and a half of the ghettos. The concentration camp started around 1940, the middle of 1942. And she was taken a lot of, so, all right, now you can ask your question again.
Yeah, I want to tell you, my first unhappiness is when I was 5, when I was in the hospital. That was to me very traumatic, because I was not a cuddled little girl, which I was spoiled at home. When we were taken to prison, to me it was a fun date, you know. But when we were kicked out of the border and I had to go to strange family, that was traumatic. I was very unhappy, and I was not even 8 years old. That was very, very traumatic.
And to answer your question, my mother often spoke about the girl who got to the camps and managed to escape 3 times. And each time she wanted to warn the Jews, careful, they're taking you to concentration
Nobody
camps.
believed it.
The girl went out of her mind, insane, because nobody believed her. And that was when she swore that she's going to write this book. That people shouldn't say it didn't happen, because nobody wanted to believe it. Like, they couldn't believe that in 1944 the whole Hungarian Jewish community was taken.
Yeah.
Why didn't they run away? Didn't they
I
see
was
what was
angry at the
happening?
Hungarian
What happened
Jews.
to the Dutch? Why did they wait till 1944 and then get taken by the Nazis? Because nobody believed. I mean,
Nobody believed
do we
it.
believe when today, what's going right here an hour away from us in Gaza, they're saying kill all the Jews. They mean it. They mean it. But we don't believe it, because we have, thank God, we have our army and we have God protecting our land. May it continue.
That's the truth. In 1944, the Hungarian Jews were sent to Auschwitz. I was angry at them for letting them take them to Auschwitz. I said, I am on the run from 38. This is 1944. What were we doing in Hungary? Living your life, you know, thinking nobody comes to you to touch you. They also were decimated. They were killed even in 1 year. A lot of them were killed. Any other questions? Yes, dear.
Even after the war, just being in America or any other country, did you encounter like a lot of people who denied the Holocaust, who didn't believe
No,
in it?
actually not. First of all, I didn't argue with them. I didn't talk to them. There were no Holocaust deniers till recent years, I believe. And these are either stupid or not realistic. I don't know what they are. Holocaust deniers. They deny that there's hunger in the world, there's poverty. Anybody wants to know anything else? Yes. I'll come to you in a minute. You want to ask me something? Did you have your hand up? Go ahead. What did you? Your turn.
I wanted to ask, when you were in the families in Poland.
Yes, very good.
Was it a
Very well-meaning
Jewish family
people.
or what were they
Yeah,
Jewish
Jewish
families?
Yes,
or
yes, Jewish. As a matter of fact, my mother tried very hard to find kosher homes for us,
Oh, okay.
because we were kosher. And as I said, my older brother was lucky enough to get into a comfortable kosher home. But with us it was harder, because you needed 2 things. You needed a kosher home, and you needed a child our age, and you needed space, that they had room for another child. So they should be a fairly comfortable family, and there were not that many people that could take in a foster child in the Orthodox circle.
And then,
So I'm not even sure how Orthodox the well-meaning people were that I was in. I don't remember. But I know they were very well-meaning, and the fault was mine that I wasn't happy. I wanted to go into my mother's room. I said she had such a beautiful room. I wanted to live with her. I didn't care about my siblings. I cared about myself. I was young enough to be very selfish. I said, how come my mother doesn't want me in her room? The fact was she couldn't stay there if she wanted to take a child in. The family didn't want children. That was their privilege, you know.
Just one other fact about reality. The present head of the PLO has his doctoral dissertation from Russia on the denial of the Holocaust. And this is our peace partner.
There is
I mean,
no
everybody
such
knows
thing.
about it, nobody
You have to
talks
be
about
very, you can't be educated, you have to be very stupid to try to deny the Holocaust. Or to try to deny all the tragedies that go on now and all over the world. They are unfortunately there, all over the world. Anyone else? Yes.
You previously mentioned that even among other prisoners, you weren't able to call your mother. So was there some sort of mechanism, or I mean, would fellow prisoners report each other to the?
You want to know the reason?
I was asking whether if somebody suspected that you were Omi's daughter, whether they would report you.
Yes, they would.
The Jews.
And for only a little piece of bread more. That's a tragedy. You know, they didn't get very rewarded. If they got another portion of food for denouncing somebody, they might do it. There were times in the history of humanity where it says in the Bible that people ate their own children, you know.
Yeah.
So it was almost as bad as that. I was afraid from the inside and the outside. We were all afraid. We were afraid of each other. Can you imagine not trusting your classmate, your roommate, you know? Yes.
Did you encounter any grace or pity or any good doings from random people you met on the way when you're escaping or your way from places?
They probably were. You mean kindness from people, right?
From
Germans? Random kindness from Germans, from Polish, from...
They probably were. They're isolated cases, and at Yad Vashem they have holy Gentiles. I happen to be one of those that did not encounter enough kindness in the world. And you might consider me almost an anti-Semite in reverse. You know what I'm talking about? It's a tragedy. But I did not find people that extended themselves enough. And today's generation, after the war, they didn't know, we never knew, it's all baloney, everybody knew. They got everything we possessed. Our businesses, our apartments, our treasures, our clothes, our money, the Germans got everything, and so did all the other nations. The Poles and the, I think even, I don't know what is with French and Italian people, I'm not sure. I think the Poles were anti-Semites too, and they didn't have a leader like Hitler to tell them exactly how to go about it, but they were all accomplices to Hitler's plan. And it was very simple. I take away from you and I give you. You know, so he was a generous benefactor. He promised them everything and he gave them. He gave them all the money the Jews accumulated in their lifetime. They took people out of their homes, out of their businesses. Literally, you can't imagine what a fortune that was. Do you know that Switzerland came years after the war to publish all the accounts that were there, that were secret accounts, that were never claimed for people that were killed. People were, all the clothes that came from the concentration camps and all the suitcases went to the Germans. Hitler gave it to the Germans to enjoy themselves, to have benefits from it. And everybody loved it. They all had something for nothing, and why not play the game of killing the Jews? It was very easy. Unfortunately, it was tragic and it's unexplainable because the Germans were supposed to be a civilized nation. If you're asking me if it can happen again, it might. It might. Depends how desperate either the leader is or the country is. Unfortunately, people can turn to animals in circumstances. I'm not saying it's right, but it can happen.
I understand it didn't happen overnight. This was a
Not
long
overnight.
training program in schools, in other words, brainwashing kids to believe that Jews were cockroaches. Now, if you saw today on Facebook, they showed the graduation ceremony in Aza, right next to us, how it's the same thing. They're in kindergarten, in GAN, they're indoctrinating them.
Let's focus on.
No,
There
it's
were a
the
lot of
same
other
kind of
Any more
indoctrination.
questions?
No, there are a lot of questions.
Yes, the man at the back.
Thank you.
You.
You spoke about the importance of God throughout this entire experience. How often did you pray during your time in the camps? And how often did you pray with your mother and sister?
Honestly, I personally probably didn't. But I had this inner belief that that God is with me. You know, I probably didn't pray and I probably didn't eat kosher. But I had a belief that somebody's protecting me. And my mother always fed us that belief that God is here to save us, that we were meant to survive. And I believed her. I am a deep believer without having had prayed every day, you know. My mother was extremely religious, but she didn't carry her religion. She was religious from inside. She believed in God. She believed God is with her all the time. And she sort of, by osmosis, I observed it. And instead of turning away from religion, I find a lot of people asking me about religion, and people think that if God did this to me, then I've got to get even with him and not acknowledge him or something. I'm just exaggerating. A lot of people blame God's action because that happened to me. God caused it to happen to me, therefore I don't believe in God. I never had that feeling. I felt that God was always with us. With each survivor, I'm telling you the truth, that each survivor is a miracle from God, because Hitler's plan was to leave no survivors. He did everything in his power to leave no survivors and no witnesses. So every survivor is an act of God, and I'm just sorry that you couldn't ask your grandparents or whoever they were about their experiences, because a lot of grandparents didn't talk, and it was very hard to get it out of them. My children learned from the Holocaust at school. I never talked at home.
And from our grandmother and aunt.
Yeah, right. My sister spoke. Any other questions? Yes, Steve.
It's hard for me to understand that your friends didn't ask you about it. Like, how could you start dating as an 18-year-old 2 years after you got to America without your boyfriend asking you where you're from, or your friends taking an interest about you're European, or even if they didn't know what the Holocaust was? So how did you explain your past to your peers?
I didn't explain.
So they just...
we were at that time novelty, you know.
Okay.
We were novelty. I don't know what my sister, whether she explained it. I never explained it. I tried to avoid the subject altogether. I lived for today and tomorrow, not yesterday. I felt more secure that way. I experienced very nice times in America. I felt where I lived in Brooklyn, New York, was very kind to me. People were very good to me. I lived in a Jewish environment. I went to synagogue and I had friends there. And I was very happy with the new life. Once I understood English, you know, it was easier. Yes.
Was it possible to make some friends in the camps, or the people were
Not in the camps,
sharing?
no.
So
You couldn't trust anybody, unfortunately. When you had a friend, you would know that either they sent you to two different places or they would kill one of them. That's why we had to be double careful. It was a very strenuous situation to be in. We had to be careful from the inside and the outside. and we had to struggle to survive. So every minute was full of tension, because you couldn't relax, you couldn't let go at all from any point of view. And if you stood in their parapets and you wanted to faint and fall down, you couldn't afford it. So my mother and my sister would hold me up to stand up. They were stronger than I. And they wanted to make me feel that I was older. Nobody was supposed to have a 10-year-old girl doing slave labor, you know. So I was supposed to be older and supposed to be able, and it wasn't easy. Not for me, not for anyone else. It wasn't easy. And also they changed our environment constantly. They sent us from camp to camp to camp constantly. They wanted to disorient us constantly, you know, discombobule us, so that we wouldn't know on which earth we're standing. Good question.
So, how did you find this loneliness? Like did you have some special ceremony or pray or anything to protect your mind, your sanity? Because
it wasn't easy. It sounds easy, but it wasn't easy.
No, I believe it was not.
Yeah, but once we came to Switzerland, I was able to have friends there. I was a teenager, young teenager. I had my first boyfriend there, also a survivor from our group, from the 300. And we were able to relax already there, you know, with each other, community. We were what you call on Hachsharot. I don't know if you know what Hachsharot, how would you explain Hachsharot? Communes, right. So we were divided, 300 of us that came to Switzerland right after the war for recuperation were eventually divided into Hachsharot for Palestine, training for Palestine, and they were given us the choice of 3 religious denominations, Mizrahi, Apol HaTzair, and Aguda. I don't know if you know what that means. That means religious, moderately religious, or free thinkers. So I do believe that a lot of the kids just went with their friends. I don't think many of them really remembered what they should belong to, so they went with their friends. We went to the Mizrahi, which is the moderate religious, and again there I was with my sister and my mother. And I did make friends there. As a matter of fact, I'm friends with a girl I just saw, Pesach. When we came, I befriended her on the boat coming to America. We were 14 years old, Ilka Schwartz. And she came to visit me in a hotel in Pesach in Tel Aviv. And we are friends since 1946, April 46. We befriended each other on a boat, we stayed friends. So that is not too many. Our life, and a lot of my friends died already of cancer, of other things. Any other questions? Yes.
I don't know if someone already asked this, but how were you, your mom, and your sister able to stay together through everything? Like through all the camps and everything?
We never were separated. We knew that once we separated, it's the end of us, whoever, you know. Our strength lay in attempting to stay together. And we had one motto, whoever went to the right, to the left. We never separated. I mean, I had a brother who was separated from his brother, you know, through unfortunate circumstances. But we happened to be lucky enough to be able to carry it out.
It was a constant struggle. Like if they were shooting every 3rd person, then they lined up every 3rd person. So that if one goes, they'll all go, and if they also one survives, they'll all survive.
We were going to the right or to the left. We didn't know which was right, which was the life and which was death. You know, we didn't know.
Just add that the start of their being together was that my mother's mother was trained as a corseteer, making undergarments for women, which was something that the Germans needed in terms of the war. And so the older daughter, our mother, was like a cutter of the and my mother was someone who
a finisher, cut threads. In other words,
so that helped them in terms of the ghettos.
Of the ghetto.
And actually in some of the earlier camps, they did that as well.
As far as the ghetto goes, you were very lucky if you got one family, one room. And if there was a 4-room apartment, then there were at least 4 families living there. Each one had a room. So at one point in the ghetto where we worked, like Jeffy says, the corsettier, we had to always be productively occupied for the German Reich in order to get ration cards and permission to stay even in the ghetto. You couldn't just stay in the ghetto. So we happened to get the last room of an apartment where we would walk through the 4 other bedrooms. And I was a child, so like a television show, you know, you walk through, people dress and undress and make love and fight. In each room there was a separate unit of family. So I was exposed to that at an early age. And so I counted my luck that we were at the last room, that nobody walked through our room. You know.
And also, just in addition, if you ever heard of the term of a matriarch, her mother was really a matriarch par excellence, and she realized, as mothers do, the superhuman power to keep a family together, because she realized if they would separate, that would be the end. And somehow, with the with the will of God and her motherly superhuman powers, I would say, was able to keep the family together all through the Holocaust.
My mother's mother smuggled herself into, when my mother described in Switzerland,
yeah, they were not allowed, they took children. That's another story. I have time for that story? There's millions of stories. Switzerland offered asylum for 300 Holocaust surviving children. They came to Buchenwald, and this famous chaplain,
Rabbi
Schachter, was very famous, a Jewish chaplain who he organized the Holocaust survivors. So he gave us a chance, if we want to go to Switzerland, to go on the transport. So we went on this transport, and I was the youngest of the quote children. So they were all about 18, 19, 20. And my mother and one other mother was a survivor there, and they went illegally. Anyhow, we come to the border of Switzerland on this train, and this Rabbi Schachter comes with us to make sure there's no trouble. He anticipated trouble. So the nurse from the Red Cross from Switzerland comes on the train, takes a look around. She says, "These are not children." So Rabbi Schachter said, "Well, these are the children Hitler left us." So she says, "We can't accept them to Switzerland. We give asylum to 300 children. These are not children." They wanted even younger than my age at the time. So Rabbi Schachter said, "Well, these are the children Hitler left us, and if you don't let them in, I'm going to go to the newspapers all over the world and publicize that Switzerland refused asylum to these 300 children, which they offered, youngest survivors of the Holocaust." They finally gave in. But what they did for us, Switzerland, after the war, and their borders were closed just like American borders.
Was your mother smuggling herself in?
My mother was in the bathroom, hidden in the train, you know, in the bathroom, because she was also too old. You're either too old or too young. I mean, everything. Anyhow, what was I saying? My thoughts were interrupted.
Yeah, but Switzerland, they let you in, and you said the borders were closed.
Yes, so Switzerland allowed us quarantine and a few weeks of rehabilitation. So that was their good side, you know, the goodness of their heart. After that, the Jewish agency took us over, and they gave us a choice of going on those Hachsharot that I mentioned, where they where we went to 3 different localities, the 300 of their choice religious ones, and there we got from the Jewish agency or whoever funded it, it wasn't Switzerland, we got education and rehabilitation and toward Palestine, toward farming, you know, and keeping kibbutz life. And we had very good teachers there, so this is where we got some education for the year in Switzerland. And as I told you before, that most of my friends went to Palestine from there. Very few were able to come to America on visas. We knew from the beginning that we would go to America because we wanted to be the family united. And my brother was in America, so If not for the fact that my brother was there and that we had our mother, if I had survived, I would have wound up in Israel, in Palestine. If I had survived in one of the Amit or Mona homes, which are glorified orphanages, you know, and where some of my friends went. Yes.
How were the orders at that time, like right after the war, in terms of receiving Jewish plitim, refugees?
Jewish what?
Jewish.
He asked how were the borders after the war in terms of allowing Jewish refugees?
Nobody allowed them. Not
Nobody.
after the
There
war.
weren't any
Not America.
global.
Not glorified America. The quotas were terrible. Really, we only got in because we were. My mother was the mother of a soldier, American soldier, so she was preferred quota, and we went with her as their children. War brides were allowed in. They married all over Europe, the soldiers, and the war brides came in. But there were no refugees that were allowed in. Each country had a quota, Poland, Germany, whatever. And they needed sponsors, and they needed people to guarantee that they won't be a burden to the state. And it was very difficult for any country. I understand that in Belgium, the survivors couldn't work. They were not allowed to get work permits, you know. What were they going to live on? After the war, the whole world was bad, even after the war. Really, nobody welcomed us. And my brother got funding to bring his family over from family members, from his own savings, and he didn't have ice cream even all the years trying to save his family, and the help of the Hayas, which is a Jewish agency in America. But you had to guarantee that you will not be a burden to the state. And the quotas were bad all over. Roosevelt didn't let Jews in, and all over, and we couldn't even go to Palestine because the British and the Arabs didn't let us in. Couldn't go anywhere. And you heard about the stories with the boats that were turned down, and all the boats that tried to go to Palestine, and they wouldn't let them in. They were turned back to Europe and got bombarded, or whoever knows what. Any other questions? I'm wearing you out, yes.
How did your brother in America feel after the war, after you were reunited?
He had all the time, he came here on his 16th birthday to America. I say here. And all the time he put his energy into bringing his family over. He didn't know whether we were alive or not. He went to school here in America, here. He went to school in America, and he worked to make money, and he saved every penny. And he was hoping that he'll have his family. He didn't know. He didn't know until 1945.
In Switzerland,
maybe April.
I think in Switzerland you found you.
Well, before
The
he
telegram.
was acknowledged in Buchenwald yet, through the Red Cross, through the Rabbi
May
Schefter.
1945.
So he knew when he was a soldier in the army, he was in the European theater. He was a translator, I think, because he knew German. But so he knew in 45 that some of his family was surviving.
Which meant that for 4 1/4 years,
We
he
didn't
had
know.
no knowledge of what happened to the rest of his family. No knowledge whatsoever.
Neither did we. We didn't know that my father was shot or that my brother was taken away. It happened after the war.
How did he get there in the first place?
How did who
Your
get?
brother.
He was taken when they said, oh, my brother, the soldier, he was a soldier, an American soldier in the European theater.
No. He asked how did he get to America?
Oh,
When he
good
was
question.
16.
They
He
had a
had a
special
visa
program.
before the war.
They had a special
a student-
program for
a
gifted
student
women.
visa, and which would expire at the age of 16. And my mother brought him illegally from Poland. She went as a Reisdeutsche, which means she took off her armband of Jewish. She went on the train with 3 children, a nephew and a niece and my brother, to bring him to Berlin from Radom. She also wanted to find out what happened to her husband, because we didn't know where my father was. So she acted and was able to, the children acted like they were Aryans, non-Jews. And she brought him to, and he had to register to the Gestapo in order to get permission to to exit. So he had to wait a whole year in Berlin till he got transport to go to America. He had this permit student visa, and he arrived to America on his 16th birthday, which was the day after it would have expired. So it was a miracle. He was all alone in Berlin with a family, a different family. My mother placed him, and he had to report to the Gestapo every week.
But they didn't know he's Jewish.
Yes, they knew he was Jewish.
They knew he was Jewish and still let him go
I
to the
believe they knew
States?
he was Jewish.
This was in
Berlin in 1930,
okay. Pretty early in the
1940.
war.
Yeah. We were in Poland. My mother came back to her children to Poland, to Radom. And she did not meet my father. She didn't know where he was. And the children she brought to Germany to unite with their parents, they all got killed. Her nephews, nieces, with her brother. You heard enough about a Holocaust story, right?
There were more stories.
The only thing I want to leave you with is that after it's all done, the end is very rewarding. I'm today a very happy person. I have had a 67 extremely happy honeymoon years with my husband, who just passed away 5 months ago, and at the age of 90. And I have 2 lovely children. I have 9 lovely grandchildren, and by now I have 8 of them married. 8 of my grandchildren are married and have children, most of them. And one still is going on 18. My youngest granddaughter was named after my mother, Penina, Pearl. Her name was Peppy. So I am considering myself very lucky. And it's a pleasure to talk to you. I hope you take something back with you, even if I leave you on a very sad note. But remember, all the Holocaust deniers are full of it. I don't know what's in their even intellectual mind. Like you say, he's a professor, doctorate Holocaust survivor. And remember that no matter what you hear from me or from any other Holocaust survivor, what you read, what you see in the movies, is not a fraction of the horror of the reality. That's all I can tell you. But there's life after. If there's life, there's hope. And I want to leave you on an optimistic, not pessimistic.
One question very fast. Exactly for how many years you was there? For 2 years and something in the camps?
No. You didn't, 19 in camps actually,
Yes.
or on the run. On the run I
No,
was
in the camps exactly.
the maximum time, from the beginning till 45, at least 5 years.
5 years. Oh,
4 or 5
because
years.
I heard it's
Ghettos.
from 1942.
No, I was at 42, I was already interned. I was on the run from 38 to 45.
7 years.
39 and 40 was ghetto. Ghetto is, and then from the ghetto into concentration camp. And I was at least in 9 of them, 9 of the major ones. Okay.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks for your sharing, and it really touched me a lot. Yeah, I'm from China, and I'm sure Chinese welcome Jewish. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, and besides, I have a big question because I think you experienced a lot of and also survived from the Holocaust. And for you, you think what's the important in life, and what's the purpose of a life? Yes, big question, I know, but I think you
I
experience
think
a lot.
faith and family.
Faith
FF.
and family.
Faith and family. Family is extremely important. Without family, you just can't exist. Now, if you don't have family, you have friends. Try to make friends. It says in the Bible, buy yourself a friend. That's what it says. So whatever that means, in other words, if it doesn't mean money, it means give of yourself to a friend and it will be returned. So I believe in family and faith. Whatever faith you're in, to have faith in some kind of power. I believe in God, you know, the one who runs this world, and I'm confident that he knows what he's doing. I don't know any better.
Thank you.
Okay. I think
that was a great question to end with. So we just want to give you a really small certificate of appreciation, as it says, to Marlit Wandel. And I think we all, I hope, took a lot from this discussion, and just to sit with you here in the salon and ask so many questions. And thank you really for being open to any questions and anything we had. And I think it's also amazing to note that we have 3 generations of your family
Right
in
here.
this room, right here with us. which
My
I
son,
think-
my grandson, my niece and my nephew, my granddaughter, everybody came here. And are you the hostess that lives here?
Noam is
I
the
want to
hostess.
thank you for facilitating this meeting. I want to thank you for your attendance and your patience to listen to me. And thank you very much, and good luck to each of you. I hope you succeed in whatever you're here for, in your education, and try to come back to Israel. Israel needs you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.